My brother away $225K. I saved for a house. The family defended him. So when I took serious action against him, the family disowned me. Because he believes that he is meant for greater things, he declines to accept low-paying jobs. His words, not mine, are those. He would just play video games in his room when he lived with my parents, so they asked that I let him live with me for a bit, so he could watch me and learn how to be independent. Furthermore, if my parents brought up the work situation, he would become enraged and complain about how everyone was always putting pressure on him. My brother was glad to move in with me because I allowed him to do so because I loved him and used to adore him even up until a few weeks ago. For the first few weeks after moving in with me, he continued to do what he had done at our parents' place. I took it upon myself to steer him in the right direction, and I sat him down to discuss the significance of starting work at a young age. Since my undergraduate days, I had worked, and by the time I graduated, I had accumulated enough experience to secure employment and earn a respectable salary. It was clear that he had passed that threshold long ago, but he had the power to change things for the better. He had no choice but to do so because our parents would not live forever. Regarding myself, I would eventually start a family of my own and would not be able to provide for him forever. He began to take things a bit more seriously after that speech, telling me he was going to start looking for work online and working on improving himself. I'm not sure if he did start looking for work, but he always seemed busy when I'd go into his room to see how he was doing. Then, a few months ago, he came up to me and asked to borrow the card from my savings account because he and a few of his pals wanted to launch their own company, and he needed capital to fund it. He required a lot of money to contribute to their planned gaming and electronics business, which they intended to open on their own. He would come to me instead of bothering our parents by asking them. He assured me that he would reimburse me for the money as soon as they turned a profit. Better more, he would turn me into a partner in their company. On paper, the strategy was sound, and he and his pals appeared to be well prepared for this as well. After consulting with my parents, they too thought this was a terrific idea and encouraged me to follow through. One of my close friends, who also happened to be a lawyer, had the foresight to advise me not to leave things up to chance, even if it was family, and to get him to sign a legal document sealing the deal, return all the money, or at some point make me a partner in his business. I should have known something was wrong when my brother hesitated to sign the formal papers, claiming that since we were family, he shouldn't have to worry about such things, so I did just that. However, I was able to persuade him that it was only a formality and that neither of us needed to worry about it too much. He followed through on that, but only after I assured him that it was merely a formality. I then gave him access to my savings account-linked credit card and instructed him to spend no more than half of it without my permission, and he consented to it. Over the previous 8 years, I had saved about $25,000 so that I could eventually buy my own suburban home and vacate my rental flat. It was very important to me because it was my hard-earned money, and I had to make many sacrifices to save that much. I expected my brother to respect that and follow the guidelines I had set for him. I wouldn't let him spend more than $12,000 of my savings without first asking, but he could ask if I needed more money, and I would make arrangements for it. After adding him to my card a few months later, I began keeping an eye on his spending and was somewhat shocked to see that he hadn't spent a single dollar of it. After that, he moved in with his friends for a few weeks while they worked on their business, and I intend to keep an eye on things. However, I started a new project after that and completely forgot about it. After several weeks, I decided to check, and to my surprise, the bank account had been completely depleted except for a few $100s. When I discovered all the money I had saved was gone, and my brother had not gotten back to me, I was stunned. After he left, we kept in touch, but our conversations were limited to his store's progress and his positive news. I didn't ask him either because I was too busy, and he didn't tell me anything about the costs. And I had faith in him. Thus, he disproved my assumption that there was any risk involved. Upon realizing that he had spent all of my savings, I made the decision to give him a call and face-to-face. He claimed that there had to have been an error, but I persisted in asking him to be honest because even his lies sounded false. At that point, he at last acknowledged that he had lost everything when he gambled it all away with his buddies. He apologized to me and said he would do his best to get everything back, but it would take some time. That's when I lost it. and I was so dejected that I didn't even confront him or scream at him. I simply hung up and sobbed for almost 60 minutes. I was furious that he had not only wasted my money, but had also spent it all on frivolous things like gambling, even though I knew that this money was something I had been saving for the future, and that I had had to make many sacrifices in order to get it. It was terrible that I had put my trust in my brother, and that he had betrayed me without even thinking twice. I was unable to comprehend that everything had simply vanished, and it was improbable that my brother could retrieve it all on his own. Fortunately, they were only my savings. I still had money to spend on necessities like bills and daily expenses, but it was still insufficient for me. I phoned my parents to inform them of what had happened since I was so upset and angry with my brother for what he had done. Despite their disbelief, they advised me to trust my brother and give him another chance to resolve things, which was absurd because all he'd done had completely destroyed my faith and confidence in that man. So for my parents to still try and defend my brother was just so insensitive and cruel, and I told them that they had to make him get a job so he could start paying me back, or they could give me the money themselves. But either by hook or by crook, I needed my money returned, or else I'd be taking him to court, because he did sign a document saying that he'd return the loan or make me a partner. And since there was no business at all, he obviously had to return the money. If he didn't, then I'd be left with no other option but to file a lawsuit against him and take things up legally. And I didn't want to go that way, since it would be a lot of drama for all of us involved, so they'd be better off just giving me the money directly. I provided them an out, but instead of taking it, they instead tried to guilt trip me, stating that this was my brother we were talking about here. And for me to even consider about taking him to court was a sin, because he was my brother, and we were linked by blood. They urged me to start over and forgive him for everything. They had no intention of punishing my brother or giving me money back. And it just served to highlight how unjust and self-centered the rest of my family was. I therefore informed my parents that I had no interest in family. I would go to court if necessary, but all I wanted was my money back. My parents persisted in their statements and even threatened to sever their relationship with me if I brought them to court. For some reason, they were certain that I was the bad guy here, and they persisted in supporting him since, presumably, he was still a young man. And individuals learn from their mistakes at this age, as though he isn't even that young. He's almost 24 years old, and I was working and taking care of my own expenses when he was that age. He's entitled to mistakes too, but it's not an error to gamble away all my savings. He deliberately made this decision, then attempted to cover it up by lying about it. There may not have even been a business concept to begin with, and that was just talk, even if there was. Furthermore, they had no intention of producing anything at all. However, I had no interest in that at all. All I wanted was my money back, no matter what, and I would gladly have gone against my family to get it. I therefore sued my brother a few weeks ago, requesting that he reimburse me for the money he had spent. And my parents went completely crazy when my brother was served, as I had already known. He was still living with his friends, and when he found out what I was doing, he freaked out. But I wasn't going to back down, regardless of what they said. They used a variety of tactics, including begging, emotional blackmail, and apology, to try to persuade me to end the legal process. However, none of it was successful. My family had always been my soft spot, so I had to brace myself for it, but I couldn't allow them get away with this. These people obviously didn't care about anything about themselves, thus my money and hard work meant more to me than anything else. I had to be as self-centered as they were then, if I wanted my money back and to be sure I had a future. In particular, my brother did everything he could to please me, even making a pledge to give the money back to me as soon as he could. But I had grown disinterested. He was not going to treat me any differently. He had squandered enough of his life and his parents' money before. He'd grown up to be a tremendously ungrateful POS. All because to our parents and their complete lack of standards or any discipline when it came to my brother. But that was their problem fully now. We've already been to a couple of mediation sessions with our lawyers to address the argument here, and tensions have been running high, largely on my part, but I can't help it because they've been infuriatingly defensive, instead of just acknowledging that they messed up and are acting like they're the victims here. Furthermore, a few days ago, my uncle revealed to me something about my brother that has fundamentally altered the way I view my parents and brother. Even though I already had a bad relationship with them, my uncle recently contacted me to let me know that he had spoken to my mother, his sister, about our ongoing disagreement, and had made the decision to be honest with me about anything pertaining to my college tuition. My parents didn't pay for my tuition at all, despite the fact that they made a big deal out of paying for it all when I first started college and advised me to work hard in my studies and make sure whatever they were paying was worthwhile in order for me to eventually repay them. In reality, it was my uncle. They had borrowed money from him to pay for me to attend an okay college, all so they could afford to send my brother to a private school. All the while, I was unaware that they had coerced me into going to my safety school, even though I had been accepted into my first choice because it fit their budget better. However, it was. Simply put, they were more concerned that my brother go to his preferred school and hang out with his pals. They therefore had to make me choose a different college. My brother came up with a plan for our parents to trick me into attending a different institution in order to fund his private school education. Until recently, I had no idea that he didn't attend public school like I did. It also completely amazed me that my parents would go to such extreme measures in order to ensure my brother's pleasure. Since I would only visit my family over the holidays, it was quite simple for them to fabricate my brother's schooling. And since I held a 4-year degree, he too received his diploma after I finished from college. I thus never ever learned that they were prepared to give up anything, not even my future. And that was really unsettling. Thus, he was just as crafty and sneaky as he is now, even at the little age of 14. And since my uncle felt that this was none of his business, no one thought to tell me this. Naturally, my parents didn't think I should know, so they could keep tricking me for a long time. I was taken aback and found it hard to comprehend the information being given to me. But it was all true. My uncle even provided me with documentation of his transfers to my mother during my college years. I had, in effect, been repaying my uncle rather than my parents, and for that reason, their manipulation was even more inexcusable because they made no educational contributions at all. But they brought it up whenever they could, and threatened to withhold everything from me if I decided to rebel against them. This was clearly not feasible for me. Every time we had a minor argument, they would remind me of what I owed them, which, as it turned out, was nothing. That one's own brother and parents are even capable of such brutality is absurd, but I suppose that's just the way my family is. After learning about it, I realized there were still a few days until the next meeting, but I couldn't wait to take action. I simply experienced simultaneous hurt and betrayal. So I made the decision to give my brother a hard time over the phone. I hadn't blocked any of them yet as I didn't have the courage to, but initially I couldn't reach him since they had barred me. I was furious at the moment, and when I found out that he had blocked me, I became even more enraged. I made the decision to do something that I was positive would damage his ego. Since his friends were all from wealthy homes and I knew this was one of his tender places, I made the decision to tell them what was going on. I was positive he must not have told any of them. Even at 20, he was constantly attempting to get their approval and blend in. I was very sorry I hadn't brought this up with his pals sooner. It felt so trivial and immature. However, I could not do nothing but sit back and watch what I understood now. Although a lot of time had gone since then, I could not bear the thought of his deceiving me for his own gain. Not just once, but so many times that I can no longer even begin to count. But after a lot of stalking, I was able to locate a few of his close friends. I then texted everyone I knew about the kind of trouble my brother was in, not revealing any details because, in my opinion, the more intimate the email, the more effective I was going to be. Think about it. As I had anticipated, I felt much better after sending it. However, my mother began furiously texting me the very next day, requesting that I retract what I had said and apologize to my brother's friends, who had reportedly thrown him out of the house they were all living in. His buddies were as shallow and pitiful as he was, and I thought that served him right when they discovered that he was embroiled in a money-related legal case and that he was never as wealthy as he claimed to be. However, my mom feels that I went too far. It appears that by entangling them in a legal dispute, I've already ruined their life. As if that weren't awful enough, I also got his friends involved and got him expelled from both his residence and his social group. I attempted to address her about what I had discovered from my uncle, but she was so frenzied that I was hardly able to say anything. This was obviously different from the previous times I'd heard my mother shout at someone this loudly. I nearly believed she was possessed. I could hear my brother and dad very faintly in the background, so things with them weren't so great either. And while my dad was attempting to calm my brother down, I'm assuming he was throwing a fit and smashing stuff. Not only does it not feel good that I set off a nasty breakdown in my family, but I also feel like I did. I would have to inform my brother's buddies that I was suing him after he had conned me in an attempt to get him expelled. Since I'm at work right now, this will be brief, but I just got an email from one of my brother's pals asking him to leave since, allegedly, he had been lying to them a lot. The reason he was expelled from their lives was not because he was poorer than them. Rather, it was because of the deceit and pretense he maintained for a long time. He seemed to make a point of spending money and flaunting his wealth, so it's not surprising that he frequently ended up spending far more than any of them. My brother said to his friends that our humble lifestyle was maintained because my parents didn't want to come off as snooty, and that his parents had supported the entire rich family act. His friends had visited our home a few times and were shocked by how modest we lived despite our affluence. It was crazy, and I'm still not sure if I should be ashamed of how hard they've been trying or laughing at their stupidity and frantic need for approval. It's genuinely quite pitiful. Although they couldn't just keep being friends with someone like my brother, who would con his own family in order to boast about how wealthy he was, his friends did praise me for being honest with them. He could have turned on his pals and done the same kind of dirty work to impress someone else one day, if he could do that to his sister, and that's quite worrying. Therefore, I guess that in the end, if nothing else, I did end up helping someone. My mother had a breakdown approximately 2 days ago, and she hasn't texted me since. However, we have a mediation appointment scheduled for 4 days from now. My brother will be in a terrible situation if we can't resolve this and reach a decision before our next meeting. In that case, the matter may proceed to trial. I will not be dishonest. That sounds like a good concept, but it also means I will have to keep paying for the legal services I receive. Although she's charging me less than she would otherwise because we're friends, it's still quite costly for me. They won't give up that easy, but I'm not sure if it's in my best interest for this to go to trial, following my brother's exposure. Thus, at this point, I really have no idea what to anticipate from any of them. Update 2. It has been less than 24 hours since my last update, and I'm back now because my family visited my place a few hours ago. They didn't have any paperwork or attorneys. They just appeared to be a mob without pitchforks. Because I had zero faith in any of them, I refused to let them in, and instead chose to talk to them in the hallway, especially my brother, who was acting like a 24-year-old guy having a tantrum and smashing stuff when I last heard from him, as if he had been refused chocolates or something. I therefore didn't think that if I let him inside my home, he wouldn't do the same thing. Or perhaps even worse, they made an attempt to persuade me to let them in, but I refused. Instead, I activated my phone's sound recorder and captured what they said to me. Since my brother and I were family, and this disagreement was negatively affecting my poor young brother's mental health and causing him to act out, my parents attempted to emotionally blackmail me into settling for a sum that was far less than what had been taken from me thus far. Then, my brother attempted to persuade me that he was genuinely attempting to straighten out his act, that he needed my assistance in doing so, and that it would be a blessing if I would accept a settlement of roughly $5,000, which is far too little. They insisted on paying me back eventually, but I didn't give a damn. I was aware that they had the means to reimburse me, but their selfishness and self-interest prevented them from wanting to. I informed them that I would call the police if they attempted to return here or to meet with me without my attorney present. I was not going to settle for anything at all. Naturally, after losing his cool, my brother kicked my door so hard that it split where he had kicked it. I discovered this out after they had departed. I also recorded that even though it was damaged, it had withstood the blow, and I would have phoned the police at that point, but it was late at night, and my attorney assured me that the security cameras and the audio evidence would enough, saving me the effort of filing a report. Before he departed, he had also threatened to make sure I paid for what I was doing to him, and I had documentation of that. Thus, I suppose I shouldn't worry too much about the future. Monsters that are insane and only care about themselves. 3 updates. Hello, I completely forgot to share what happened here, and it has been 3 weeks since my last update. At the following mediation session, I showed them the proof of their attempts to intimidate and threaten me at my house in order to settle for $5,000. I also informed them that I wanted to take this matter to trial in order to have my brother imprisoned. My family came to understand that I was more than capable of achieving that and that I wasn't bluffing. And that's what ultimately got them to agree to refund my money and cover the cost of replacing my door, simply because that's how petty I am. In addition, I was able to obtain a restraining order against them since my brother's comments about making me pay were worrisome considering his track record of deceit, cunning, and temper tantrums. Furthermore, I've stopped giving my mother money so she can pay my uncle back. Since I'm no longer in contact with her, I'm handling things personally. My life has been quite hectic lately, but now that my awful family is no longer a burden, I'm doing well. They're allegedly spreading false information to the rest of the family about our falling out in an attempt to make me feel excluded. But so far it hasn't worked because people don't trust them because they've always been self-victimizing narcissists. And at last I exposed their deceit, and I'd be happy to repeat it.